Welcome back to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're cutting through the fog of war propaganda that's been thick enough to choke on. We've got 5 stories stretching from occupied Palestine to the South China Sea, and every single one of them tells you something the mainstream networks won't. Maya, where do we start?
I'm Maya Clarity, and Alex, we start where the symbolism is most brutal. Middle East. I reported this week that Israeli police detained a Jewish lecturer and then literally took scissors to his kippah to cut off a small Palestinian flag he had stitched onto it. Think about that image. State agents physically cutting a symbol of Palestinian existence off a religious garment worn by a Jewish man. That's not policing. That's ideological surgery performed in public.
And let's be clear about what that act reveals. The Israeli state has spent 2 years telling the world that its war is against Hamas, not Palestinians as a people. But you cannot simultaneously claim that framing and then send officers to slice Palestinian iconography off a citizen's head. This was a lecturer, Maya. An academic. A Jewish Israeli expressing solidarity. And the state treated that expression as contraband.
It's also a tell about who the occupation actually fears. They don't fear rockets, they have Iron Dome, F-35s, and an unlimited American checkbook. What they fear is legitimacy collapse. They fear Jewish Israelis publicly rejecting the narrative that Zionism and Jewish identity are inseparable. Cutting that flag off was an attempt to enforce that fusion by force. Middle East. I caught it. Most Western outlets won't touch it.
Compare the coverage. If Iranian police had cut a religious symbol off a dissident's clothing, it would be wall-to-wall on CNN for a week. When Israel does it, the story dies in specialty publications. That asymmetry is not an accident, it's the architecture of manufactured consent, and it's been running on autopilot since October 2023.
Which brings us to story 2, because the same architecture is at work in Lebanon. Al Jazeera is reporting that Trump has extended the Lebanon ceasefire by 3 weeks. And Israel has been accused of using the truce window to further its war aims. Let that sink in. The ceasefire is the cover. The bombs keep falling. The assassinations keep happening. The ground incursions keep creeping north.
A ceasefire in name is not a ceasefire in fact. Since the original November 2024 agreement, there have been hundreds of documented Israeli strikes inside Lebanese territory, on homes, on vehicles, on what the IDF calls Hezbollah infrastructure, but which routinely turns out to include civilians, journalists, and medics. Trump extends the paper agreement by 3 weeks and the White House claims diplomatic victory. Lebanese families bury their dead.
And who benefits? The defense contractors, obviously, Raytheon, Lockheed, Elbit. The political class in Washington that needs a peace process theater to justify continued weapons transfers. Netanyahu, who needs perpetual low-intensity conflict to keep his coalition alive and himself out of prison. The losers are always the same: Lebanese civilians in the south, Palestinian refugees in the camps, and the regional stability everyone claims to want.
What's missing from the Western coverage is the accountability question. If a ceasefire is being systematically violated by one party, why is that party not facing sanctions, arms embargoes, or diplomatic consequences? The answer is the US-Israel relationship is structurally exempt from the rules that apply to every other country on Earth. That's not analysis. That's the observable pattern since 1967.
Let's pivot to the Pacific, because the war machine has more than one theater. South China Morning Post is reporting that China's Southern Theater Command ran naval drills in waters east of Luzon, the northernmost major Philippine island, right next to Taiwan, in explicit response to Balikatan 2026. The annual U.S.-Philippines exercise. Beijing called it a necessary action. Washington will call it aggression. Both framings are incomplete.
The Balikatan exercises have ballooned in scale every year since 2022. We're talking about thousands of U.S. Marines, live-fire drills, and increasingly, the integration of long-range anti-ship missile systems positioned to threaten Chinese shipping lanes. The U.S. framing is that this is about deterring Chinese expansion. The Chinese framing is that this is about encircling the second-largest economy on the planet. The truth is both sides are correct, and both sides are escalating.
And who profits from this escalation? Again, follow the money. The Pentagon's budget hit over $1 trillion this fiscal year. The Philippines just signed a $5.5 billion arms deal. Australia is on the hook for AUKUS submarines that won't arrive until the 2040s. The military-industrial complex gets paid coming and going. They sell the weapons, then they sell the next generation of weapons to counter the first generation.
What the mainstream won't tell you is that there is no actual Chinese invasion of the Philippines being planned. The intelligence assessments leaked and published do not support that framing. What's happening is a classic security dilemma, artificially accelerated by defense contractors who need a peer adversary to justify trillion-dollar budgets. The Cold War template is being dusted off because it worked so well for Lockheed the first time.
And the Filipino people are the ones paying the price. Their government has traded sovereignty for the illusion of protection. They've allowed 9 U.S. military bases under EDCA, most of them pointed at Taiwan. If a shooting war starts, the first missiles don't land on Washington. They land on Luzon. That's the deal Marcos Jr. signed on behalf of 100 million people.
Let's go to story 4, because accountability is finally, occasionally, arriving somewhere. Al Jazeera reports that Syrian authorities have arrested Amjad Youssef, the main suspect in the 2013 Tadamon massacre in Damascus. For viewers who don't remember, Tadamon was one of the most horrific documented atrocities of the Syrian civil war. A video surfaced in 2022 showing regime-linked forces executing at least 41 civilians in a trench and setting their bodies on fire.
This arrest is significant for what it says about the post-Assad transitional government. The fact that Youssef is in custody at all means the new authorities are, at minimum, performing the gestures of accountability. Whether that translates into genuine justice, full trials, full disclosure of the chain of command, full reckoning with the Russian and Iranian officials who enabled Assad's machine, that's a completely separate question.
And here's what the Western coverage is missing. Tadamon happened in 2013. The West knew. The video evidence has been in academic hands since 2022, surfaced by researchers at the University of Amsterdam. The silence for 9 years was strategic. As long as Assad was a useful chaos agent against ISIS, his crimes were tolerable. The moment he fell, suddenly accountability was possible. Justice shouldn't be geopolitically convenient.
It also raises a question nobody in Washington wants to answer. If Assad's regime is being held accountable for massacres of civilians, what framework do we apply to Gaza? What framework do we apply to Mariupol? What framework do we apply to the 40,000 dead in Yemen from the Saudi bombing campaign the U.S. actively supported? Accountability is either a principle or it's a weapon. Right now, it's a weapon.
The selective memory of international law is perhaps the greatest unreported story of our era. The Hague indicts African leaders and Russian ones. It does not indict American presidents who authorized torture, British prime ministers who lied nations into Iraq, or Israeli officials currently under ICJ review for genocide. The law is not blind. The law is aimed.
And that brings us to our final story, which on the surface sounds almost comic. The Guardian reports that Tokyo is encouraging public servants to wear shorts this summer to cut energy costs. Cute, right? Until you read the actual reason buried in the article, the energy crisis is being driven by the US-Israel war on Iran. That's the quiet admission. Japanese bureaucrats are sweating through their suits because of bombs dropped on Tehran.
This is how global the Iran war actually is, and the Western press has done everything possible to make you forget it's even happening. Iran supplies a significant fraction of global crude. Strikes on Iranian infrastructure, retaliatory closures of the Strait of Hormuz, insurance rate spikes on shipping, all of it flows through to energy markets in Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo, and your electric bill. The war is not over there. The war is in your thermostat.
And notice the framing the Japanese government has chosen. They're not saying, call your representative and demand diplomatic pressure on the US to stop bombing Iran. They're saying, wear shorts. The political imagination has been so thoroughly colonized that the proposed response to a war of choice is a dress code change. That's the level of learned helplessness we're being trained into.
The Guardian at least had the honesty to name the cause. Most US outlets would have written this story as Tokyo tackles climate change with casual Fridays and left out the war entirely. The erasure of cause and effect is the core technique of modern propaganda. You feel the consequences. You are not told the source. Then you blame the weather, or immigrants, or your own thermostat.
Let's connect the threads, Alex, because these 5 stories are not 5 stories. They're one story told in 5 locations. Story 1. The occupation criminalizes Palestinian identity down to a flag on a hat. Story 2. A ceasefire becomes a cover for continued war. Story 3. A Pacific arms race is manufactured to justify military budgets. Story 4. Accountability arrives only when it's politically convenient. Story 5. The economic shrapnel of an unreported war reaches Tokyo.
The through line is a global order in which a small number of governments, Washington, Tel Aviv, London, and their contractors, operate outside the rules they enforce on everyone else. Palestinian identity is criminal, Israeli flag cutting is policing. Lebanese sovereignty is negotiable, Israeli strikes are defensive. Chinese drills are aggression, American drills are deterrence. Syrian massacres are atrocities, Gaza deaths are collateral. Iran's response to being bombed is terrorism, bombing Iran is statecraft.
And this double standard is not sustainable. It's not sustainable morally, and more importantly to the people running it, it's not sustainable politically. The global south is watching. BRICS is expanding. Dollar alternatives are being negotiated. Every hypocrisy the West commits is another reason for 100 countries to start building parallel institutions, and they are. The unipolar moment is ending, and the people in charge are making it end faster.
What the mainstream media will not tell you is that this is not a story of chaos. This is a story of a specific system producing specific outcomes that benefit specific people. The weapons manufacturers. The fossil fuel majors. The political class that moves seamlessly between the two. Everyone else, the Jewish lecturer in Jerusalem, the family in southern Lebanon, the fisherman near Luzon, the Syrian in Tadamon, the office worker in Tokyo, is paying the bill.
So here's our call to action. Stop consuming news passively. When you read a headline, ask 3 questions: who benefits, who is named as the aggressor, and what cause is being quietly left out of the frame. When the New York Times tells you a strike happened, ask who pulled the trigger. When the Pentagon tells you drills are defensive, ask whose territory they are rehearsing to attack.
Support independent journalism, and we mean actually support it. Subscribe to Middle East Eye. Read Al Jazeera English with the same critical eye you read anything else, but read it. Read SCMP for the non-Western perspective on the Pacific. Read Declassified UK, The Grey Zone, and yes, independent shows like this one. A media ecosystem that depends on 3 billionaires and 4 defense contractor-funded think tanks is not a free press.
Call your representatives. Not to beg, to put them on record. Ask them specifically, do they support continued weapons transfers to Israel while an ICJ genocide case proceeds? Do they support the expansion of Balikatan into an anti-China staging ground? Do they support the Iran war that is currently unreported and unauthorized by Congress? Get their answer in writing. Publish it.
And refuse the learned helplessness. The people who want you in shorts instead of in the streets are counting on your exhaustion. They are counting on the sheer volume of outrage to numb you. Pick one of these stories. 1. Learn it deeply. Talk about it with 3 people this week. That's how narrative monopolies break, not all at once, but one conversation at a time.
We are Truth Report. We do not work for a network. We do not answer to a board. We answer to the evidence and to you. Next episode, we're going deeper on the Iran war that officially does not exist, and we're following the money from Tadamon to The Hague. Until then, stay awake, stay angry, and stay kind.
Because those 3 things, together, are the only things power has never figured out how to defeat. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Truth Report, signing off.